Hi, good evening, everyone. This is another Google Hangout from the Redesign Challenge, and tonight we have a very special guest with us. We are welcoming Sarah Brown Wessling to our GA show tonight. She is a high school English teacher in Johnston, Iowa, the 2010 National Teacher of the Year, and also Teacher Laureate for Teaching Channel. So thank you so much for coming tonight and speaking with us, Sarah.
My pleasure.
As we chat tonight, if you're watching live tonight, you can tweet to #RDChallenge if you have any questions or if you'd like to participate in the conversation. All right, so with that, I'm going to ask everyone who is here with us tonight to do a brief introduction for yourself, and I'll start as I see you on the screen, and go ahead, Chris.
His mic.
There we go. I got it. It's my first Google Hangout in the last 5 hours, so pardon me. My name is Chris Bronke. I'm an English department chair in suburbs of Chicago. In that role, I teach one class and then spend the rest of my day evaluating teachers, helping design curriculum, working on Common Core teams, overseeing budget, scheduling, and about 17 million other things. So I'm also a community manager for the Redesign Challenge, so very happy to be here in both those roles.
All right, thank you. Lawrence, how about you?
All right. How you doing? Let me know if you can hear me.
We can, yep.
Okay. My name is Lawrence Smith. I am a math coach here at Tampa, Florida, King High School. I primarily work with new teachers as well as our EOC requirements for the new stuff that we've rolled out, which is awesome. I also work with Hillsborough County School District as well with facilitated planning for revamping our Algebra 1 needs, as well as working with Hillsborough Community College for our community reach out program to get those kids moving forward a little bit.
All right, great. Thanks for coming tonight. All right, Missy, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Missy Calloway from Jefferson County, Kentucky. I'm an instructional coach at Butler Traditional High School in Louisville. I work primarily with EOC courses. I'm an English teacher by trade for 20 years. I also work with all of the PLCs in the building and do quite a bit of professional development. So that's why I'm here tonight.
Okay, good. Welcome. And welcome, Rachel. Can you introduce yourself briefly? Oh, we're having some trouble hearing you, Rachel. Okay, we'll give you a second to figure that out, and we'll jump over to Val.
Hi, my name is Val Brown. I'm here in Seminole County, Florida, which is a suburb of Orlando. I work as a teacher on assignment in the professional development in our district office. And primarily I work with our instructional coaches this year, helping support professional learning communities at all the schools, kind of whatever they need me to do. I'm also a community manager for PD Redesign, and I'm really excited about the challenge. And I don't know if Mrs. Wessling remembers this, but I emailed her like 2 years ago and asked her to send a happy birthday message to my husband.
Yes.
And because you are my husband's favorite teacher. And so not only did she do it, she had her class make a happy birthday video and send it to him. And so that kind of made me like boss wife for getting that done. So thank you for that.
My pleasure. The kids love doing it.
Yeah.
Oh, great. All right, Rachel, are you with us? Not yet. Oh, technology. All right, I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself, and Rachel, when you're ready, just chime into the conversation. I'm Lisa Hollenbach. I'm also a community manager for Redesign Challenge and in charge of live events, and this is what brings me here tonight. I am a social studies teacher in Palmyra, Pennsylvania. I teach AP Psych and Sociology, and I'm really excited about the Redesign Challenge and the work that we've been doing. And I'm really excited to invite Sarah here tonight because I've also done some work with the Teaching Channel and been following a lot of your work, Sarah. So really excited to have you here. I heard a sound that was new. Is that you, Rachel? Nope, not yet. All right. Well, let's get the show on the road and talk a little bit about why we're here. And as you all know, the work that Sarah has done for the Teaching Channel as Teacher Laureate puts her in a position where she works very closely with video. So my first question for you tonight is why is it that video plays a central role in your professional learning?
Yeah, absolutely. Wonderful question. So I guess for me, it comes down to the difference between the things that we think happen in a classroom and then what actually happens. And, you know, I think that we all have been in these positions where we leave a class or a lesson and we go to the teacher across the hall, or we go to talk to the teacher during lunch or whatever it is, and we say, oh, that went really well, and we focus on the things that we remember. Or maybe it's the opposite. Maybe we say, oh, that was just a disaster, it didn't go well at all. But we don't necessarily focus on concrete details. And so I think what happens is that a lot of times we end up talking about our practice in the abstract of our memory. Right? So our memories are going to hang on to certain things. We're going to focus on that one student who got it or that one student who didn't get it, perhaps rather than looking at it more systematically. So what video has done for me is it's helped me to get out of the abstract and into the concrete. And usually, I mean, I'm a high school English teacher, so I spend most of my life getting people out of the concrete and into the abstract, right? But in this case, right? But in this case, it's different because when we operate with our natural bias, because that's what happens, right? We reflect with a natural bias, and when we operate only with that, we don't see things the way that they really are. And so, and to be honest with you, video has been part of my practice since I was a student teacher. So this is not something, and I didn't really, it's kind of interesting, you know, this is one of those things that I didn't actually realize how much it has been part of my practice until I really started to write about it and kind of trace this all the way back to student teaching. When I would get, you remember those big, huge cameras that had the videotapes in them, and like, my dad would take them on vacation, and I swore he would walk crooked, you know, for the 2 weeks when we got home because they were so huge. So I would get those, and I would have somebody stand in the back of my classroom when I was student teaching and record everything that would happen, and I would watch those with my professors and say, okay, help me get better. I don't know, you know. And at first, all I could think about was I said okay too much, or I didn't like what I wore, or I, you know, like those kinds of things. And then I started to use it more effectively. And I used it as part of going through the national board process. I chose to use it as part of my master's work. So it's, I suppose in a strange way, I'd always been on this kind of pathway without ever realizing how much I had relied on the power of this other lens to get me to pay really close attention to what was going on.
Great. Now, I imagine in your time with the Teaching Channel, you've had the opportunity, and probably throughout your career, you've had the opportunity to watch a lot of video, a lot of teachers practicing, and you've probably seen some very good videos and probably some very bad ones as well.
Some of which are mine. Some of the ones which are mine.
You know, I'll tell you, one of my favorite videos on Teaching Channel is when a lesson goes wrong.
Yeah, because everybody likes a car wreck.
Oh, and you know, if that was your car wreck, then congratulations. But you know, it's a very, I think it's a very vulnerable place when we put ourselves out there and say, hey, this went wrong, and the cameras kept rolling, and here's what it looked like. And I could imagine the panic in that first moment where things started to go out of control for you. So, you know, that was a great video to watch and to see it from that kind of lens. So we spent a lot of time in Redesign Challenge talking about professional development that we were calling POUR. And what I'd like to do is turn it a little bit today and ask you to tell us what, in your opinion and in your experience, what excellent video professional development looks like.
Absolutely. So here's the interesting thing about this. you can have excellent video, and that's one kind of conversation, but excellent kind of video-based PD is not so much about the video, to be honest with you. The best PD that I've seen that uses video is more about all of the apparatus that is around the use of the video. So it's the questions that we get people to ask because of the video. It is the way that people use video to ask critical questions of themselves as instructors. And that's, that's the interesting thing. In the end, video is a tool. And it is a very powerful tool, but alone it's not going to accomplish better PD. Because I will tell you, I have seen people use video really the same way that sometimes teachers use worksheets, right?
Yes.
Where you have the video and you look at it and you say, okay, now let's look for these certain things, and that's a good first iteration of using video. And in some cases, that's what the technology allows us to do. I mean, there have been times when I have done that, and there's some things that I do at Teaching Channel to try to get teachers to look more carefully at video. And so I understand that that's part of it, but it should not be the end goal. And so when we think about really excellent, use of video, it is how that video propels teachers to get better. And so whether that is, again, the kinds of questions that we ask or how we use that, I think that's really what becomes the most important thing.
Great, thank you. How would you say that teachers would be able to identify that professional development that is quality video? Do you think it's questions, or just is there something more to it?
Yeah, so I guess it's the difference between collecting strategies on videos and learning how to become a better teacher because of video. So I've seen both of these things. And again, the collecting strategy, sometimes I say it's like the Pinterest. It's like the Pinterest part of teaching. And I'm not saying Pinterest is all bad, because we all need strategies, right? And we like those, and we need to kind of have a reserve of those. But strategies alone do not make better teachers, right? Strategic teaching is what we're after. And so when the purpose of watching a video is to figure out, well, this is actually how you do KWL, right? Or this is actually how you do this kind of assessment. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with it, but that's not necessarily going to elevate your practice. So the kinds of discussions that we surround video with when we are asking teachers to make careful observations about where the student learning is instead of the parts of the strategy, when we ask teachers to look at video in ways that get them to figure out those kind of invisible instructional moves that teachers are making, that's how we learn to become strategic, and that's the goal. And that's the hard part, because that's messy. There isn't one right way to do it. It's not linear. It has to be recursive. So there's that component that I think goes into it that becomes really important. Again, it's kind of the purpose that we assign to looking at video. So if our purpose is to collect strategies, that's fine, but that's not going to transform teaching.
Absolutely. And I think, I think to myself as you were talking there that I guess I know when I'm in a workshop that has a great video PD, when video becomes challenging, when video becomes difficult. And I think I'll go one more step, because it's going to take us nicely into the next piece, when video creates cognitive dissonance for us in our instruction. And what I came across when looking a little bit at your blog post, Sarah, is a blog post from June 5th that I absolutely loved, and it was called "The Margins of a Comfort Zone." And you talking about leading a professional learning experience that was somewhat unique. So I would like the whole group, so when you guys are ready to jump in, certainly feel welcome to do so, to have a little chat around that. And maybe you can start us off by giving us a little bit of background about what you were asked to do, and some of those immediate takeaways from your time with the teachers.
Absolutely. So this experience happened in February, and it was a year in coming. So it was the previous February. I had done a keynote in California, and a teacher came up and said, "Would you come to our district and do some work with us?" I said, "Yeah, I would love to do that." She goes, "But here's what we would like." She said, "Your students don't look the same as our students, so we would like you to come and teach our students so that our teachers believe that they can do these things too." And I said, "That sounds great. It sounds like a real, challenge, but it sounds wonderful because I'm always looking for a challenge." So that started some really wonderful conversations. And as we started to kind of frame what this experience would look like, I really was doing some thinking about how not to just go in and teach their students, but how to create a learning experience for everyone. And so I created this format in which I would start by kind of doing an overall presentation of the lesson, what I intended to teach, how I intended to do it. We did some practice observations. I had the teachers develop some problems of practice, so some things that they were interested in getting better at in their own practice. And then I taught the lesson, and while I was teaching the lesson, their role was to be really careful observers. So they were to gather evidence that would help us discuss their problems of practice. And then after that, we had a debrief. And so what happened during that debrief is then our conversation was anchored in something that really happened. It wasn't anchored in the abstract. It was anchored in what they saw. And I think the other really important part was they saw me abandon 2/3 of a lesson plan. So I had this long, I had this lesson plan ready to go for this 90-minute class period, and I had to abandon about 2/3 of it and really change what we were doing in order to still meet our purpose for learning. And I think that was one of the huge takeaways. And that's a conversation that you just can't have any other way, really. At least in the way that we had it. So it was really a wonderful experience, and one that I am working on replicating in other school districts because it's that powerful. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that I have people, ready to ask you some questions. So, Chris, go ahead.
All right. Sarah, first of all, thank you for joining the Redesign Challenge in this community tonight. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
So this question comes out of the video, that 12-minute video of you working with the teachers from which you wrote the blog. And in a very specific moment, even though I'm a high school teacher, in the 4th grade classroom, when you had that moment, or where the teachers realized that had you started with PET, the kids wouldn't have struggled as much as they did.
Right.
And I love that. I've talked about dissonance for years. Lisa and I have gone back and forth on this a bazillion times. And so I'm curious, I guess, ultimately where I'm going with this is where you land or currently stand with this idea that traditionally when we think about modeling in the English classroom in particular, we've talked about I do, you do, or we do, you do. Yep. But where are you at with this concept of more contemporary, sort of flipping that paradigm to you do, then we do, then I do, then back to you to create more of that dissonance? Is that something that you're embracing, or where are you in that process?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. I think it changes for me, to be honest with you, and I think it has a lot to do with where my students are at, probably more so than me. So if it's something that we haven't done before, or something where I think they need to hear me think out loud before they practice it, then I'm going to do that. Then I'm going to think out loud first, and then we're going to go through it that way. I think that in circumstances where I'm asking students to transfer their learning, you would be much more likely to see that those steps or those points in that process either reversed, or you would see them in a more recursive way, I think. So again, it goes back to purpose. So first time, or are we transferring our learning?
Great, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question.
Go ahead, Missy.
Okay, so hey Sarah, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about the professional development component of when you were working with kids that weren't your own, which props to you for being willing to do that. It's hard to walk into somebody else's classroom and just kind of take control. So in thinking about the pre-brief and then the debrief that you did,
Mm-hmm.
that felt a little bit like lesson study to me, but
Yeah.
not exactly lesson study. So
Right.
What I'm getting at, I'm wondering, so the lesson that you taught in the AP class and then the lesson that you taught in the fourth grade class, did you design those lessons with the teacher, or was that something you kind of got a background of what they were doing, and so then this is what you brought to them? I was just curious.
Yeah, that's a great question. So what I did, it was something that happened over a period of time, and when I first started with more of the people who were designing the PD, and I asked them, what kinds of skills or dispositions do you want me to work on? What is it that you really want to see that you're not seeing? And that's when we really ended up talking about critical thinking. They really wanted to see some critical thinking in action. And so when we got to that point, then I interviewed the teachers. And I talked to them about what they were doing, what they would be reading, where their students were at, just all kinds of questions like that. And then at that point, I did design the lesson on them.
Okay.
So so it wasn't a co-taught lesson. If I were co-teaching the lesson, then it would have been, I think, more collaborative in terms of the design of it. But one of the things that's interesting that didn't really come out in the videos or kind of the blog was that the teachers whose classrooms I was in, their experience was really unique, because what they talked about afterwards was having the ability to see their own students very newly, in a very new way. And I think for them especially, it was really helpful for them to not be invested in the lesson in the same way that I was. And I'm not a fourth grade teacher, right? So of course I'm like practicing in fourth grade classrooms around here. And so I got so I'm like finding fourth grade classrooms who will let me come in, and so I'm doing that here in Iowa. And those teachers said the same thing to me. They said, it was the same process. We talked about what they ultimately wanted to learn, those dispositions, did an interview with them, and then I designed the lesson. And they said the same thing, how powerful it was to see their students learning from someone else and what they learned about them as learners, which might be part of like the silver lining of all of this, I think.
Right. Well, and I definitely think that is the perk, having had that same kind of experience myself, watching my kids with another teacher. What you learn about your students when you're not in front of them, but when you're one of them, is very powerful. So I definitely would say that's a silver lining, for sure. And definitely an idea to take back as a model for teams to work together and teach one another's kids.
Yeah, I agree. I think I just think there's a lot of power in this concept, and certainly something that I'm going to keep pushing on, because I haven't figured it all out yet for sure. But there's a good start there. Yeah.
Sorry, that was actually where I was going to go next with that question. That was what I pulled out of one of the videos, was just that 1 second where you talked about that experience of the classroom teacher. And I think it first probably really feels alien, to them, but what you could possibly learn from watching your classroom from outside.
Right.
And,
absolutely.
What a powerful model that is, and we just don't have an opportunity to do that in many cases. So really powerful.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's also, I think part of that is the willingness to turn your class over. I mean, I think that is part of it. Because I know I have a really hard time. I mean, I have to be really honest about this. I have people come in and it's hard for me to just turn the class over, because we're all so invested in all of this. But it is really an important aspect of for us to continue to study, I think.
Great. Go ahead, Val.
All right. You mentioned earlier, and something that just stuck with me, strategies alone do not make better teachers. I'm curious as to the debrief of this scenario with the teachers. How did you guide them to not focus solely on strategies, but the other things that you were doing?
Yeah, well, actually, it wasn't too difficult because we had established those problems of practice at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
So because we established problems of practice, that was really what largely the conversation was about. I mean, at the beginning, there was a little bit at the beginning, where this worked and that worked, or that didn't work, whatever. But after that, it really was about the inquiry that they brought to that learning. And I mean, honestly, whenever I work with a school district or work with teachers, that's one of the first things that we do is we work to establish problems of practice so that whatever learning takes place during that time, they have that mental Velcro that they are trying to take away pieces of learning that attach to the problems of practice that they are already wrestling with in their classrooms and in their practice. So in that case, I mean, I think that's the big thing, to be honest with you. And we could talk about the strategy, but I have learned how to guide people away from that conversation and say, okay, yep, that's good. We know that these were the steps, but let's talk about the learning. The second thing is that early on in that pre-brief, we practiced some observation. And in that practice observation, we really focused on looking at student learning. And so when that becomes the focus of the observation, when that becomes the question that we lead with, it's a lot easier to focus on dispositions, on learning, on skills, on strategic teaching, rather than focusing on the strategy, the things that we did.
Go ahead.
Thank you.
Sarah, I'm really curious. I love when you talked about, even just earlier today, you said the natural bias that we all have. I talk about that all the time. Mirrors have bias, is what I like to say to my teachers. Right. And I have 21 teachers in my department, and they were all shocked 3 years ago when I decided to work with an instructional coach, because they were like, well, you're the chair, like, why are you working with a coach, right? And then I said, mirrors have bias. I'm curious to what extent, and maybe not even now within your career, just because of, I'm guessing you're probably a little busy. He says sarcastically. What is the balance for you between using video within your own reflective practice versus working with an instructional coach, and how does that interface, or do you see one being more beneficial for you or for teachers that you work with, and how does that play out for you?
Yeah, that's another great question. So interestingly enough, so I have a camera in the back of my classroom. It's a small little iPod Touch that I put on a swivel, and I have a student who starts it at the beginning of class. And that lens is, really one of the things that I use to hold me most accountable for what happens in the classroom. There's no way I can watch all of that footage. I don't even pretend like I'm going to. But I pull out 5 minutes here, I pull out 5 minutes there. Sometimes, if what I want to look at is if things just felt off or some kid felt off, I will just scan through it really quickly. And just look for like the classroom layout and where are kids moving and who is where, like things like that. And so using that as a tool has been a really good coach for me, actually. And I think because of my collected experiences, certainly going through national board 2 times now, through the way that I did my master's work, just lots of different things. I've done some video projects with our regional educational agencies here in Iowa. I've learned how to be really critical, of video, and so I can kind of coach myself in a lot of ways. But that doesn't replace those really good conversations. I will tell you that most of my conversations come with somebody who's a trusted colleague. We have not had instructional coaches in my building or district until this last year. And so my role with the instructional coaches this last year was really to say, all right, my classroom is open, come whenever you want, practice whatever you want, you're not going to make a mistake in here. And so they did. And so I had people in there constantly. But in some ways I was kind of coaching the coaches, and letting them practice how to ask questions, letting them think about how many is too many, or when do you give feedback and when do you ask the question, like those kinds of things. I guess the good thing, though, is that I honestly feel like I have to get better every day, and so I am a person who has a lot of questions to start with, and I am a person who feels like I have a lot to grow, or I have a lot to get better at. So I don't know if that really answers your question or not, Chris, but I certainly use colleagues, but they're probably from my PLN that I seek out more so than kind of a system that's already in place in my district right now.
Yeah, I mean, that makes perfect sense. I ask partly selfish, or mostly selfishly, as department chair, I'm always hesitant to join the grade level team that I'm also teaching, because it's kind of this weird dynamic where I'm like the evaluator, and I don't want them to feel as if they have to go with like my ideas. And so, I work with an instructional coach for that reason, but I'm just always curious on that balance of like, I don't know, how much feedback should be self-created and how much should be others created. So.
Yeah, well, I think that's a really interesting position for you to be in, to be colleague and evaluator at the same time. I mean, that's a tough, tough line. Wow. And I would say this. I would say that in any position, right, any position, especially any position of leadership, that you want to practice exactly what you want to see them do. So if you want them to share video, then you have to share video of your worst moments. Like, you're going to give them the junk, right? Don't give them the good stuff, because if you give them the good stuff, you're done, right? Like, they're never coming back, right? Because they already have in their mind that you are this person, right? And you already have all this ethos, and in a way, it's a detriment, right? So sometimes ethos is great, but here it's a detriment because you need to be human, because they feel really human. And so I think that part is just really, really important. And I think in terms of the feedback, I always say it's about seeds and not storms. It's about asking one good question that they won't forget rather than giving them a ton of information that they won't remember.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah.
Great. Go ahead, Val.
How have you included students or parents in watching your videos, maybe giving you feedback? Just curious if you've done that at all.
That's a great, I really haven't included parents. I really haven't. That's a really good question, though. And definitely something I should think about doing. Really, that's, yeah. I think kind of thinking about how to frame that, in a way would be really important. And thinking about how to do that in a way that honors the work of my colleagues, actually, is the first thing that comes to mind. Would be really important because, as you know, when you are an innovative teacher, it sometimes comes at the price of isolation. And so there is that fine line that you're walking, right? How can I push and push without getting too isolated because of that pushing? So I think that's a really great idea. I think in terms of students, I get student feedback all of the time, but I have not, at my classes, we always watch the Teaching Channel videos when they come out, and we talk about them, but I've never actually asked them to evaluate me based on video. I've asked them to evaluate me in 100 other ways, but not that. So both of those are really fantastic ideas. So I'm sure you'll see me doing both of those this year.
All right.
Wow.
Thank you.
All right, Lawrence, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I had a question because I actually like the connectability of it. In mine's because I am an instructional coach, is a little bit of a different look for what I do. So one of the things that I intentionally talked with my instructors about are, what do your teacher moves look like? What do your students' moves look like? So how, and it kind of goes back and piggybacks off what Val was saying, how do you end up looking at student work as well as looking at what that student move is, and is that something that you've thought about looking at as far as another outcome for the PD?
Oh, absolutely.
Because if we really look at least from my lens, if I'm looking at it from what my teacher moves are and how I could have said this here or did that there, how did that really impact what happened in the classroom so I can look at the student work and see where the teaching move was effective?
Yeah, that's so important. And when I use that video from my own classroom, just that everyday stuff, I would say a lot of times what I choose to watch comes from looking at student work. So, so maybe I'm going through a set of papers, or I'm looking at whatever we did in class, and I'm kind of trying to notice patterns and figure out what individual students are getting, or what as a whole class we are or aren't getting. And a lot of times when I see a gap between where I think the learning needs to be and what I'm seeing in front of me, that's a lot of times when I will go to the video, and then I will look at, well, how did I give those directions? Because I heard it one way, but clearly this is not what happened. So let me go pay attention to that. So it's a really great question, something that I left out in terms of explaining, but absolutely, I think student work is crucial, and there is absolutely no doubt that my national board process, scoring AP exams, and then my thesis work, forced me to really value the importance of student work, and seeing that, and that's my most important data, to be honest with you. It really is. Of course I look at the big systematic kinds of data pieces, but nothing is more important to me than looking at that student work.
Thanks, that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
All right, Rachel, I just want to check in with you. I'm not sure if your mic is working, but if you want to take yourself off mute, if you have anything you want to say. Still no luck. But if you have a question and you want to type it in the chat box, I'd be happy to ask it for you. And I see Mimi. Anything from you tonight, Mimi? No. All right.
But a smiling picture.
Yes. She's lovely.
Oh, wait, there was a question. There was a question that just popped up.
Yes. So how do you build stronger networks or generalize the work that you've done at a systemic level?
Oh, big question. Well, so that's a tough question, because in the sense that I am not running a school district, I'm not an administrator, I'm not a literacy coach. I work with those teams very closely within district, but I am not that person. So I guess I would say this, though, about kind of the systematic leveraging of this kind of thing. I would say that more than anything, it is about finding ways to live what is most important. Because we can talk about it, and we can talk about it, which I do think is important. I mean, I absolutely think having that language that we rely on to remind us of what's important is crucial. But we have to find ways to live it. And the way that we do that is by never forgetting what our goal is, which is student learning. And that means everybody has to teach. I mean, that's kind of my thing. I spend a lot of time talking to folks who are in administration, and remind them that regardless of what your classroom looks like, you are always presented with a teaching opportunity. And it is that teaching opportunity that you have to use in order to change the system. Whether that is the faculty meeting, whether that is the department meeting, whatever it might be, those teaching moments are just as important to systematic change as the conversation you have with the teacher in the classroom, because it's the same thing that would happen. I'm on the first day of class with my students. I don't hand out a syllabus. I don't tell them what the rules are. I don't do any of those things, because I know that I could craft a really beautiful syllabus with really beautiful language, and I could give them this perfect thing. And they would sit and listen to me tell them how much I value student voice and how much I believe in a student-centered classroom. And they would sit there while I stood in the front of the classroom and told them this. They're going to walk away not with my words, but with their experience. And their experience was absolutely contrary to my words. So, I teach on the first day. I mean, that's the thing, right? Teach on the first day. And And that's kind of part of this attitude, I think, that we have to have all of the time, that we're always teaching.
Wow.
So I know that doesn't directly answer your question, but it is how I talk. Certainly with folks who are in those positions, and when I have an opportunity to work with them, that's certainly how I work with them. You know, make them learners. Yeah.
Wow. Thanks so much for that. I think that that's very helpful, especially as teachers are getting ready to write those syllabi and get ready to start to think about those first lessons. You know, about how we need to walk in the doors this year.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you know, that was a great question. Thank you. So I'm going to switch it a little bit, and I think that we could probably talk to you, Sarah, all night long, and we would never run out of questions. But I want to give the folks that are on the Hangout with us tonight a little bit of a taste of learning how to observe, the same way that you did in the classroom that this blog and your lesson is based off of. So what I'm going to ask everybody to do is go ahead and mute yourself, and I'm going to take control of the screen, and we're going to watch a short video, and when we're finished, Sarah is going to walk you through the same process that she would have walked through the teachers on that same day that they watched the same video.
How about we do this, though? Can we do one thing before you start it?
Sure.
So, yeah, let me say that when you watch, so I want to give you a purpose for watching the video, all right? And this is kind of like this is in some ways the same thing that we do before we go into a classroom. If we don't set a purpose for what we're observing, we're most likely to look for the superficial things, right? Do they have the objectives on the board, right? Which doesn't really matter. I mean, it does, but it doesn't, right? Because I've been in classrooms where people have everything perfectly, and I can't see the student learning. And I've been in classrooms where there's none of that stuff that's supposed to be up there, and man, are those kids on fire, right? Okay, so so this is how I'd like you to watch the video. I want you to watch it for moments of student learning. That's what I want you to focus on. Okay?
All right. All right. Thanks so much.
Okay.
All right. All right. I'm hoping everybody is seeing my screen. All right. All right, I had this up, I promise. Not sure what happened to it. There it is.
In the morning when we do the morning meeting, we always have some sort of listening game. So we did the Tootie Top. We are going to Tootie Top. So it's first thumbs up. Thumbs up. A Tootie Top, a Tootie Top, a Tootie Top Top. A Tootie Top, a Tootie Top, a Tootie Top Top. So they're actually doing multiple tasks at one time. Thumbs up. Thumbs up. Elbows back. Elbows back. Feet apart. Feet apart. A tootie ta, a tootie ta, a tootie ta ta. A tootie ta, a tootie ta, a tootie ta ta. And you're so aware if who's able to take more than one direction at one time. Thumbs up. Thumbs up. Elbows back. Elbows back. Feet apart. Feet apart. Knees together. Knees together. Bottoms up. Bottoms up. Tongue out. Tongue out. Eyes shut. Eyes shut. Turn around. A tootie ta, a tootie ta, a tootie ta ta. A tootie-ta, a tootie-ta, a tootie-ta-ta. Okay. And those are the steps of the tootie-ta. Great.
All right. I am going to stop sharing my screen right now, and we should all be back. And go ahead and unmute your microphones.
All right. Isn't that fun? The 2D Ta.
So much
my
fun.
own children, that is their favorite teaching channel video right there. Yeah, so I think the question becomes, where were the moments of student learning in that video?
So I think one of the places is when the littles aren't sure what the next step is. They're looking at their neighbor. They're not automatically swiveling the head to look at the teacher, which is kind of cool that she's got them circled up so that they can see one another. So definitely when there's like that frozen moment, like, oh, what am I supposed to do next? And they look at their neighbor, I think that's definite evidence of student learning.
Wonderful.
I think what was interesting for me, Sarah, I was at the conference on English leadership this past fall when you did that. So it was really cool, and then I watched your video from the blog, so now this is my third time actually seeing this. And it's interesting because I've seen something different every time, and actually, even though you gave me the purpose to watch for moments of student learning, what stood out to me this time was moments of students who weren't learning. Who despite trying to look around the room in that last set of commands where there were like 6 different ones, literally were just kind of spinning, like their hands were everywhere, their arms were everywhere, and it was like that, I hadn't seen that before, and so I think it was really cool, and as someone who goes into classrooms to evaluate, like, I often look for moments of student learning, but that was just like this aha moment I just had in the last 30 seconds of looking for those moments of student unlearning, or whatever you want to call it, so I think that was pretty cool.
That's wonderful.
I think I really liked the, you know, when they were looking at the teacher, those who could see the teacher, her very authentic modeling. Yeah. And, you know, she was in there with those little ones, and I think that's so important for us, even when we don't work with little ones, to be that authentic and that excited about whatever it is that we're showing them and modeling them to them. That's when the learning happens.
Absolutely. And it's joyous. I mean, there's so much joy right there. It's just, it's really special.
It makes you want a 2D Ta.
Yeah. It does, doesn't it? You know, I don't know. You know, I have wondered what my seniors would say at 8 o'clock in the morning if I whipped out the 2D Ta. I don't know. Maybe it would be interesting to see what 18-year-old boys do with 2D Ta.
I think they'd like it, actually.
Yeah.
I think you're probably right.
More than the 18-year-old girls were. Yeah, the 18-year-olds, they would find some fun in it.
Yeah. I know. You know what? See, you all are giving me all of these challenges, right? We got parents on video, and kids are going to evaluate me on video. We're going to do the 2D Ta at 8 o'clock in the morning this fall.
Yeah, I think that's a challenge to everybody on the broadcast today, is we need a video of your class 2D Ta-ing away.
2D Ta.
Done.
Live on Periscope, the 2D Ta.
Done. I know. Let's do it.
Done.
All right, I'm in.
Oh, that's awesome.
But so I think all of these observations that you're making, though, really are important, and they're really crucial. But I think what is important is that that this is the first thing that we look for, right? Because usually what happens is we go into a classroom, and what happens? People are looking for the teacher moves, and they're not even necessarily looking for the strategic teaching moves. They're kind of trying to wrap their heads around the strategy, you know, what's going on, what's the part of the lesson that they're in, more so than, you know, are they really so present that they are focused on student learning. So a lot of times what I do is then we'll watch the video a second time. And so I don't know if we have time to do that or not, if we want to or not, but when we watch it the second time, that's when I ask everyone to take a look at the teacher moves. So what is the teacher doing or not doing in order to, you know, help those kids learn? And I do think that, Chris, you kind of picked up on this idea of students who are not learning. I think it's important when we look at teachers that we don't only pay attention to what they are doing, but we also pay attention to what they're not doing. Because sometimes what we don't do is just as deliberate and just as effective as those overt moves that we make, and we have to really honor that as part of the process, because we as teachers take up a lot of space, you know, and the more space we take up, the less room they have to grow. So we have to really think about ways to honor that part of the work as well, I think.
Wow, I think that was a really powerful statement right there, Sarah. The more space that we take up, the less room they have to grow, and that's really we could wrap up in all of that this new focus on the students are in charge of their learning, and I think that was a great way to say that. So, and I hope somebody tweets that with a hashtag somewhere. All right. Great. Is there anybody else that wants to talk about Tudita or what you're observing at all in the Tudita?
Lawrence, that's the question it looks like.
Go ahead, Lawrence.
It was funny because you made the comment about what's happening and what's not happening, and I was primarily paying attention to the two little boys standing next to the teacher during the Tudita, and I noticed this used to happen before I became an instructional coach, that sometimes you get so good and so active in what you're doing that the ones closest to you by far wins. And what ends up happening is they're so close to the teacher and they want to emulate the teacher so much so that they miss it, even though they're the closest ones to it.
Right.
And when I saw the two kids that were closest to it, it's almost like a mindset of, since I'm so close, I have to be so good. And the teacher doing the things so active and so animated that they miss the ones closest to them. So it's great to be engaged, it's great to be a part, but that proximity control kind of, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
So kids, I was like, oh man, that was my class. Wow.
Yeah. You know, and I think that, you know, one of the things that really speaks to, though, is that it speaks to all kinds of balance, right? That we have to have all kinds of balance in the classroom, because there's always going to have to be somebody close to us, right? And so what we have to do is, I think, make sure that we are always balancing where those moments are at, and you know, are we changing things around the physical space? You know, are enough that we can get kids in different places so that we can see things more fully and more wholly, because I think it's pretty impossible to see everything on any given day, right? But it is very possible to see the system of your classroom, you know, over the course of a week. So that's part of, and we have to realize that kids ebb and flow, right? As learners, we ebb and flow in all of this too. And it's not linear. It is recursive and it is messy. So we have to be kind of in that mess. But some of that mess means being really flexible and making lots of changes in order to achieve that larger balance.
Yeah.
All right, great. So, Sarah, going back to the experience that you had in that school where you sat down for the first time and did this with the teachers, what do you think your major takeaways were from that experience for you?
Well, for me, I think one of the things that I don't think I learned, but I think it was reaffirmed for me, was just how absolutely present you have to be in order to teach. And I you know, this is kind of a hard thing to explain. It almost sounds like Zen-like, but it actually is. Because you have to be so with them that you are not thinking about yourself. You know, it is not my beautifully designed lesson plan that is the most important thing right here. It is not these cameras that are expecting me to capture this thing that I just said I was going to do that's the most important. What is the most important is these kids who are in front of me, and that I know what we have to learn, and I am paying close enough attention to where they're at right now that I'm willing to change and do whatever we have to do in order to learn something before we leave, right? That it's not about turning the page. It's not about doing step 3. It is about being really in tune with their process. And that's exhausting. And that's one of the things we don't always talk about. I mean, we as teachers talk a lot about the things that are exhausting in our profession, the minutia, right, all of those things. But being fully present for someone else takes a great deal of fortitude, I think.
Wow, completely agree. And you're right, we don't talk about that part our exhaustion and that part of the taxing piece of the job enough.
Right. Even though it's incredibly human, right? That's like one of the most human things we do, honestly. Right? I mean, and a lot of times we hear about these human moments because we hear about the student that we talk to after class. We hear about the one that we couldn't let go of. You know, we're up in the middle of the night thinking about that student. You know, we hear those, you know, that portion of that narrative, but we don't often talk about what it means to be present with a learner, you know, right in the middle of that learning process. And a lot of times I say that, you know, every student has two stories. Every learner has two stories, the story of who they are and the story of how they learn. And I have to know both of them. I have to know what they love to do. I have to know what sets them off. I have to know what sets them on fire. Like, I have to know those things, but I also have to know how that student learns. And I have to know what it means when they pull back. And I have to know what it means when they want to be alone or when they need somebody else. And that is part of what this process is about. It's about reading people's learning stories.
Great. All right, so we're kind of rolling up to the 8 o'clock hour here. And so what I'd like to do is quickly run across everybody that's here and ask you, what's your major takeaway from tonight, from this experience in the Google Hangout? And we'll start with Chris.
So many. The moment I'm at right now is actually, I'm sorry if my face looks very frustrated or puzzled. You know, Sarah, listening to you talking, we don't have to answer this question. I know we're short on time, but the takeaway that I'm left wrestling with is because of how much we need to be present and able to adapt and all of those sorts of things and knowing the kids, I'm almost in a spot right now where I'm questioning seems too strong to say, but I'm wondering if there's ever a point when there's too much effort put into the actual planning process, because so much needs to be flexible in the moment based on the kid and the kid that day and each of those 27 kids that specific day to each of them, where that fine line is between just really knowing the stories and sharing a story versus like planning binders full of lessons and yeah.
Yeah, so actually I think that's worth taking 30 seconds to answer.
Great.
So the quick answer is yes, it is worth it, but not for the purpose we think. Okay, so it is worth it to do that careful design, and it is worth it to come up with those lesson plans and to think about, you know, however that process happens for a teacher. I think it's worth it, but it's worth it because not because we intend to follow that beautiful design, but because it is the process of that beautiful design that got us ready to pay attention to our kids. And I think that's what's really important.
Great, thank you so much.
Yeah.
All right, Lawrence, do you have a takeaway for us?
My takeaway is visual transparency. I mean, I'm a big proponent for being transparent with telling my students or working with the faculty of saying, okay, this is where we're going, this is why we're going that place, and it's even better when you can authentically put vision behind it. It's one thing that we talk about, this is where we're going, you see it on paper, but to actually see where it's going and to be able to critique for yourself, is this what I really need versus is this what my kids need? And to visually be able to see in the moment where that can be more powerful, I think that's my biggest takeaway from it.
Great. All right, Missy.
So I think my biggest takeaway tonight is that idea of having teachers watch their students with someone else, and I think that's something I'm going to try, or at least invite some of the PLCs that I work with to think about as a professional learning experience for them, because there was such power in that video, in that moment when the teachers were watching their kids while you were teaching them. So I truly appreciate that, and I thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
All right. I have got a post from Rachel. Her sound is still out, but she says that she learned she's taking away tonight the importance of training ourselves to have focus when we're observing others or reflecting on our own work.
Yep.
All right, Mimi, something you can add?
Whew. Well, I was listening and not watching during part of it. I went into the tanning bed, so I learned some good insight from there. And I'm a physical educator, and when I video myself, I'm trying to figure out how I want to say this. It came back to the quote that you had about how much attention is being on the kids, and when you're watching, what are the kids that aren't participating doing? And I think that, and I've not even really had time to like process everything yet, but how this conversation applies to the physical education world, I think takes a completely different dynamic. Even with the 2D Ta, and I'm thinking, well, that's just a perfect thing that goes along with physical education. But I think the parallels are so strong that a lot of times maybe the classroom teacher doesn't realize the parallel, and then the physical education teacher doesn't want to see the parallel as well. But I think I'm a district leader of a professional learning community in my district, and I think this would be a takeaway from this might be a way to incorporate more video kind of recording and looking at ourselves and reference it, kind of like what you did there. And so I think it's very insightful, and I'm one of these people that when you put me on the spot, I get my words kind of garbled, but I see large next steps with my PLC this year in physical education in the application of this.
Wonderful. All right, and off to you, Val.
Thank you, and thank you, Sarah, for your time tonight. My takeaway is that we have to be fully present to know if our students are learning, and because that's so difficult, video can help.
There you go.
Very good. And I think that I'm thinking to myself, I'm so glad that this is a live and recorded broadcast at the same time, so that I want to just stop and go back and watch this again. I think that it's been such a great experience to have that time to get inside your head as a teacher, and to hear about the kind of things that you've learned along the way. And you know, that's been really powerful for me. And I've taken away from this with Redesign Challenge, we've had a lot of conversations about the process versus the product. And I'm finding the connection there with what you're talking about, the teacher moves and the student moves, and focusing on the learning. And sometimes it's hard, even though we immediately go there, and a lot of the innovators in Redesign Challenge did that same thing. Immediately they go to the process and they start to tell us about what they did. But sometimes when we're focused more on a product, it becomes very hard to talk about and to be able to convey to someone else how we do what we do. So I found a lot of parallels with that kind of thinking here tonight. So more for me to think about, you know, definitely. But thank you so much for being here with us tonight.
Oh my goodness, it's my pleasure. Really, really, this is just a great chance for me to really unpack my thinking about, you know, about a lot of that work. So I am grateful to all of you for letting me, you know, unpack my thinking and just to, you know, have these questions and keep challenging me to think and to grow and to get better. So I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again for all your time
And
tonight.
2D Ta challenge. 2D Ta
2D Ta challenge. Do not forget, come September.
That's right. That's
I know. I will
be
say,
the
if it's not on one of my lists, I will forget it. I don't know. I had the third child, and if I don't write it down, it's gone. It's gone. So if somebody just sends me an email, then it's on the list, and I will do it.
Very good.
That's great.
All right, gang. I want to be very, very mindful of your time, and we're just a few minutes past 8. So I'm going to sign off for the night for Redesign Challenge. But thank you all for spending an hour here with us tonight. And again, thank you, Sarah, for being our special guest. And we'll be back at you in September with the 2D Ta.
Thank you.
Cheers, guys. Thanks.
All right. Bye.
Bye.